It looks like a victory. The target is in custody, the special operators are home safe, and the administration is taking a victory lap. On the surface, this is American power doing exactly what it is designed to do: find a threat and neutralize it. But I need you to look past the tactical success. I need you to ignore the headline for a moment and look at the cost. Because what we just witnessed was not a simple law enforcement operation. It was a stress test of the American system, and we failed it. We didn't just breach a border. We breached the trust of an entire hemisphere. We traded decades of hard-won diplomatic leverage for a fleeting moment of televised dominance. We are being told this was a show of strength. In reality, it was a display of strategic exhaustion, a sign that we have forgotten how to lead, so we have resorted to breaking things instead. If you want to understand why this operation makes the United States less safe, less credible, and more isolated than we were 48 hours ago, you need to listen to what comes next. We are going to strip away the official narrative and look at the structural damage underneath. This isn't about one man in handcuffs. This is about the future of American power. Let's walk through it. It is tempting to look at the images coming out of this operation and feel a sense of resolve. It is tempting, and frankly, it is designed to be tempting. You see the tactical gear, the precision, the overwhelming force, and finally, the target in custody. It hits every note we have been trained to applaud. It looks like competence. It looks like strength. It looks like the good guys winning. And if you stop thinking right there, if you accept the headline at face value, everything seems fine. The narrative they are feeding us is simple. A criminal was identified, a plan was made, and justice was served. It is a clean, linear story. It fits into a 3-minute news segment. It fits into a tweet. It fits into the way we want the world to work, where American power is absolute and the bad guys have nowhere to hide. But I need you to step back from that satisfaction. I need you to look past the tactical success of the moment and ask the question that is being carefully omitted from the official briefing. If this was just about one man, why did it look like an invasion? Because that is the friction point. That is where the official story begins to grind against reality. We are being told this was a law enforcement action. We are being told this was about serving a warrant, about extraction, about judicial process. But you do not breach the sovereign airspace of a neighboring nation with this level of military hardware just to serve a paper. You do not risk a continental diplomatic crisis just to expedite a trial. When you look at the scale of force employed, the mismatch becomes impossible to ignore. This wasn't a surgical extraction conducted in the shadows. This was loud. This was visible. This was a deliberate spectacle. And that distinction matters. In the world of intelligence and high-level extraction, the United States has capabilities that are effectively invisible. We have spent decades perfecting the art of the quiet removal. If the goal was simply to neutralize a threat or secure a prisoner, it could have been done without the world watching in real time. It could have been done in a way that preserved the fragile diplomatic architecture of the region. But they didn't choose that path. They chose the loud path. They chose the path that humiliated a neighbor and forced every ally in the hemisphere to question their own security. Why? Because this wasn't about the target. That is the hard truth we have to confront. The target was the excuse. The target was the prop. When you strip away the rhetoric about justice and law and order, what you are left with is a raw demonstration of power. This operation wasn't designed to uphold the law. It was designed to show that the United States, or specifically this administration, is no longer bound by it. It sends a message that is chillingly clear. Boundaries are for other people. Sovereignty is a suggestion, not a rule. And if we want you, we will come and get you. And we do not care what breaks in the process. This is where the comfort of the one-man narrative falls apart. If you believe this was just about capturing a criminal, you are missing the signal. You don't burn down a house to catch a mouse unless you want everyone on the block to see the fire. The sheer excess of the operation tells us that the cruelty, the visibility, and the violation were not side effects. They were the point. The strategic objective here wasn't the man in handcuffs. The strategic objective was to prove that no one could stop us from putting him there. And once you realize that, you realize that the specific crime doesn't matter. The specific target doesn't matter. What matters is that the rules of engagement have just been rewritten. We are no longer operating in a framework of international cooperation or legal reciprocity. We have moved into a phase of unilateral enforcement where the only justification required is the capability to do it. That is not police work. That is not foreign policy. That is an imperial decree dressed up in tactical gear. And while it might feel like a victory today, while it might feel good to see a villain in chains, we have to ask ourselves what we just traded to get that image. We traded the pretense of partnership for the reality of dominance. We stripped away the polite fiction of sovereignty and replaced it with the naked assertion of force. So, do not let them tell you this was just a raid. Do not let them tell you this was just about one bad actor. This was a structural shift. It was a statement that the old rules are gone, and that from now on, power is the only currency that this administration recognizes. And the problem with relying solely on power is that eventually you have to use more and more of it just to stand still. We are not looking at a closed case. We are looking at the opening move of a much more dangerous game. Now we have to look inward. We have to turn the camera around and point it directly at Washington, because the most alarming part of this operation isn't what happened on the ground. It is what happened, or didn't happen, in the room where the decision was made. In a functioning republic, the use of lethal force abroad is supposed to be heavy. It is supposed to be difficult. It is supposed to drag through a dense machinery of legal review, intelligence assessment, diplomatic risk analysis, and congressional oversight. That friction is intentional. It is designed to ensure that when the United States moves, it moves with the full weight of the state, not just the impulse of the executive. But watch how this unfolded. Where was the friction? Where was the debate? We are seeing the evidence of a short circuit. The traditional wires that connect military capability to democratic accountability were bypassed. The State Department, the intelligence community's dissenting voices, the legislative leaders who are supposed to hold the leash, they were not just overruled, they were rendered irrelevant. They found out when we found out. This is the repurposing of the American military. We are watching the transformation of the world's most sophisticated defense apparatus into something that looks uncomfortably like a personal instrument of political will. When you take the most potent military force in history and remove the institutional guardrails, you don't just get a faster army. You get a dangerous volatility. You get a system where the decision to violate a border or ignite a region can be made with the same casual speed as a campaign stop scheduling change. And this is where the trap of success becomes so dangerous. Because the operation succeeded tactically, nobody is asking about the procedural failure. The target is in custody, so we forgive the fact that the chain of command functioned more like a royal court than a democratic institution. But think about what that precedent establishes. We have just validated the idea that the president can unilaterally deploy significant military assets for a police action inside a sovereign nation without a declaration of war, without a specific authorization of force from Congress, and without the consent of our allies. If that is the new baseline, then the executive branch has effectively severed itself from the checks and balances that define our system. This was a stress test, and the institutions failed it. They failed because there was no pushback. The silence from the Capitol is deafening. It tells us that our legislative branch has abdicated its responsibility, preferring to ride the wave of a popular outcome rather than do the hard, unpopular work of protecting the separation of powers. We are witnessing the normalization of the unitary executive in its most kinetic form. It is the belief that the president is not an administrator of the law, but a warlord who happens to live in a White House. You might say, well, they got the bad guy, so the system worked. No, the military worked. The system is broken. The distinction between American power and American process is vanishing. American power is the ability to destroy a target. American process is the wisdom to know if you should. When you have the power without the process, you are no longer a superpower. You are just a giant with a hammer looking for nails. The real damage here isn't the diplomatic fallout, as bad as that will be. The real damage is that we have proven that the internal brakes don't work anymore. The engine is revving, the driver is pressing the gas, and the steering wheel is disconnected from the wheels. We survived this turn. We didn't crash this time. But the mechanism that is supposed to prevent the crash has been dismantled. And now that we know the institutions will bend, now that we know the military can be wielded this loosely, we have to ask ourselves, who is going to stop it next time, when the target isn't a criminal and the cause isn't so clear? The precedent is set, the guardrails are down, and the machinery of the state is waiting for the next order. This is not an accident, and it is not an aberration. We have to name the logic that drove this, because if we treat this as a random outburst of aggression, we miss the pattern. This operation is the perfect distillation of Trumpism applied to national strategy, and I want to be very precise about what I mean by that. I am not talking about tweets. I am not talking about personality. I am talking about a specific, observable, governing philosophy that views foreign policy not as a game of chess, but as a series of reality television episodes. The defining characteristic of this philosophy is the preference for the immediate over the enduring. It is the addiction to the spectacle. Think about the raid again. It was designed to look good on a screen. It was designed to dominate the news cycle for 48 hours. It provided a rush of dopamine, a sudden, sharp hit of winning. But strategy is not about the next 48 hours. Strategy is about the next 40 years. And this is where Trumpism acts as a contaminant in the American system. It rewards the short-term tactical win at the expense of long-term strategic solvency. It burns down the capital of trust and reliability that took generations to build, just to keep the lights on for one more news cycle. When you treat international relations as purely transactional, when you act as if no deal matters, no border is real, and no ally is necessary, you are not projecting strength. You are projecting instability. Consider the signal this sends to the rest of the world, not to our enemies, but to our friends. To be an ally of the United States used to mean you were under a security umbrella. It meant there were rules, but there was also protection. Now, if you are a leader in Latin America or Europe or Asia looking at this operation, what do you see? You see a superpower that is erratic. You see a partner that cannot be trusted to pick up the phone before they kick down the door. And rational actors respond to that. They don't just sit there and take it. They recalibrate. They start to hedge. They start looking for other partners, or they start developing their own capabilities so they don't have to rely on a Washington that might change its mind or its target on a whim. We are actively incentivizing the world to build structures that exclude us. This is the paradox of the America First approach. By trying to force everyone to bow, you eventually force everyone to leave the room. You end up isolated. You end up with a kind of brittle dominance where you have to force every single interaction because nobody volunteers to stand with you anymore. True power, hegemonic power, the kind that actually keeps America safe, is based on legitimacy. It's based on the idea that when we act in a way that stabilizes the system. Trumpism rejects that. It treats legitimacy as a weakness. It treats constraint as surrender. But look at the cost. We are turning foreign policy into domestic theater. We are using the military to score points with a voter base, treating the sovereignty of other nations as a prop for a rally speech. That is reckless. It is the behavior of a declining power, flailing around, trying to prove it still matters by breaking things. The tragedy is that the United States is strong. We don't need to break the furniture to prove we own the house. But when leadership is driven by this contaminated logic, this need for constant, loud validation, we make unforced errors. We trade away our soft power, which is infinite, for a momentary display of hard power, which is finite. We are eroding our own position. We are making it harder to negotiate trade deals, harder to build intelligence coalitions, harder to manage pandemics, harder to contain actual rivals like China. Because why would anyone sign a contract with a nation that tears them up whenever the president needs a poll bump? This isn't strength. It is distinctively, structurally weak. It is a sugar rush strategy. And when the sugar crash comes, and it always comes, we will find ourselves alone in a hemisphere that we used to lead, wondering why nobody listens to us anymore. We are buying a moment of applause with the currency of our future. And the account is starting to run dry. The most dangerous lie being told right now is that this event is over. The helicopters have returned to base, the target is in a cell, and the news cycle is already starting to drift toward the next distraction. But in the world of geopolitics, nothing of this magnitude is ever just over. We need to understand the concept of irreversibility. International relations is a system built on precedent. It is a fragile architecture of norms, agreements, and unspoken lines that everyone agrees not to cross, because crossing them makes the world dangerous for everyone. We just crossed the line. And the problem with crossing a line like this, violating the sovereignty of a neighbor with military force, is that you cannot uncross it. You cannot unring the bell. We have established a new baseline reality in the Western Hemisphere. We have formally announced that the sovereignty of Latin American nations is conditional, subject to the whims of American domestic politics and security anxieties. Think about the second-order effects of that. Think about what is happening right now in chancelleries from Mexico City to Brasilia, from Bogotá to Santiago. They are not looking at this as a victory against crime. They are looking at this as a threat assessment. They are realizing that their borders are porous to American force. And when nations feel vulnerable, they do not just sit still. They seek insurance. We have just accelerated a process where our neighbors will look for counterweights. If the United States is going to act like a bully, the rational move for a Latin American leader is to deepen ties with powers that can balance us out. We just opened the door for China to walk into the region, not just as an economic partner, but as a guarantor of sovereignty. We have handed our rivals a diplomatic weapon they will use against us for decades. And it goes darker than that. We have legitimized this behavior. By engaging in this operation, we have validated the argument that a powerful nation has the right to reach across a border and snatch whoever they deem a criminal or a threat. We have stripped ourselves of the moral standing to object when other nations do the same thing. When a rival power decides to extract a dissident from a sovereign country or launch a police action across a contested border, what will the United States say? We can't quote the law. We can't cite the norm. We shredded the norm. We have created a permission structure for international lawlessness. And this is the tragedy of the moment. We are celebrating a tactical extraction while ignoring the strategic eviction. We are slowly evicting ourselves from the role of the indispensable partner. We are becoming the indispensable problem. This trajectory is now in motion. Even if the administration changes, even if the rhetoric softens, the scar tissue remains. Trust takes a lifetime to build and seconds to break. We just broke it. Future administrations will inherit a hemisphere that is colder, more suspicious, and more resistant to American influence. They will inherit a diplomatic landscape where every handshake is guarded and every agreement is viewed with skepticism. We have traded a singular, fleeting moment of satisfaction for a permanent degradation of our environment. So, do not look at the prisoner. Look at the map. The lines have not moved, but the ground underneath them has shifted. We are entering a new era of hemispheric reality, one where the United States is more feared, perhaps, but less safe, less respected, and ultimately, less powerful. The operation is done, but the consequences have only just begun.